FRE 19. Okay, let me mention a few things on this. This is will be FRE 19. Remember, there will be at least two more sketches here after this. I think Jared's going to probably do those, and but you'll have time if you want to redo this during the day. I highly recommend you do a redo. You just do it during the day. Make the best drawing of this you can before 5 o'clock. That's the goal, right? So what I am going to ask, I'm not going to dictate. If you want to do this in graphite, that's fine. If you want to do it in pen and ink, that's fine. I'm going to be doing this in pen and ink, but I am going to ask that you use templates and straight edges on this one, okay? To some degree, because of kind of the nature of this drawing. And I'm just going to say straight up, this is not my medium. I don't like drawing the way I'm about to have to draw here. But it has to do with the thing that we're drawing, and I've done this as a Prismacolor, and I've done it as pen and ink, and I just think it works better as a pen and ink. So that's why we're going to go that route. So yes, templates, yes, straight edges, but we're going to be setting up a freehand perspective. So what we're going to look at here is a doorknob. I've done a few of these installations on weekends too, actually. It wasn't this weekend, but I've changed all the hardware in my house at least twice. And anybody changed doors, hung doors before? Work construction maybe? Ever had to change out hardware on a door? It's actually not too, most of the time, the hardware part's pretty easy. Hanging a door can be pretty tricky if it needs to be planed off or fitted a little bit. One of the things that I've noticed about this particular drawing that seems to trick people is they just don't know what they're drawing. Maybe you've never paid attention to a doorknob before, or noticed how it works, or understood the geometry of it. So we're going to spend just a moment here to kind of look at what a doorknob actually is. Maybe you never thought about it. Maybe you just see the handle and that's it. But it's actually a pretty interesting mechanism. It's a cylinder post that gets pushed in and out based on, you're turning the knob. And it's all based on cylinders. There's a flange that goes around the outside that kind of covers up the hole that gets bored through the door to accommodate for this. There's another hole that gets bored in the end of the door, and that's where this piece goes on. So when you put a door set together, you put the back half on, you put the front half on, you slide the one in the end of the door, and then you put the two handle ends on, and they connect, and then you screw it all together, and it kind of locks itself, triangulates itself in the door. So it's important to kind of understand that this door latch, this cylinder, and this post are on center with this ellipse right here and this ellipse right here. They run center. There's a shaft that runs through here that activates and pushes this right here. So understand that there's an axis running right through the middle of here where all of these ellipses are lined up, and that shaft is perpendicular to this post, and the center lines of the two are at the same height. That's kind of an important first step. And so what we're going to be drawing is kind of a close-up of a door, just almost like I can see the door handle that's out here on our door to the studio. We're going to zoom in. It's going to be kind of like we're not looking at the whole door, we're just looking at kind of a close-up of the door. And and we're going to be really focusing in on the door handle. Now, I'm not going to make you draw the back side of the door handle here. This is usually hidden behind the door. You know, the door is going to come out to right here, right? So really this is going to get hidden, wouldn't actually be in your field of view. What you'll end up seeing is this side of the door handle and the latch, and then the edge of the door. So this is kind of what we're going to be drawing, is something close to this viewpoint, but with a doorknob in it and the latch put in. And we use the center lines of that ellipse and where we set that up to wrap that axis around, and that tells us where the latch shows up right on this side of the door. So over the years, I've just seen a lot of people struggle with this drawing, and it's really, there's no new concepts shown here. Everything that's here we've done before, but I think a lot of it's just kind of maybe not understanding what a door knob is and how it works and maybe the geometry of it. So I think that's important to kind of start with. The other thing we're going to be doing with this doorknob is that we're going to be putting a key on it. So this is a nice photograph, actually, really nice photo. We won't do the hanging key, but we're going to do a circular key that's in the lock, right? And so this circular key has an ellipse that's perpendicular to the ellipses that are actually on the doorknob. Again, this is not anything new, but it just seems to trip people up. They get those minor axes messed up on those, and for whatever reason, I think it's worth just kind of studying the doorknob. This is actually the doorknob we're going to draw, which is kind of a tapered design. It's based really on a couple of cylinders up front, and then a tapered kind of effect where it gets smaller as you get closer to the door a little bit. And you can see the flange of this is a little bit taller, or a little bit wider in diameter than the door. It's the doorknob itself. So again, I want you to try to get the proportions of this as close as you can, but I also want you to get the perspective right on this too. I think the perspective is what I see a lot of people really mix up here. So I'm going to start with my least comfortable tool, the one I really don't like to use, and that's my ballpoint pen. This is one of Jared's favorite sketch tools. I'm going to start out with it today. Vanishing points are off the page, and yes, you do want to use light construction lines here. So small paper size. I'm going to go ahead, since I am going to be using a good bit of ellipses and that sort of thing. I'll freehand some of this, but I'm going to go ahead and start by, yeah, hold on one second. Let me get a line drawn where y'all can see what I'm doing. I'm going to go ahead and start by kind of drawing the door width a little bit. I think that's, yeah, I'm just drawing two vertical lines. Draw a door width. Okay. There's nothing to see yet. Draw a door width. And make sure those are vertical, because I don't think I got mine quite vertical. I'm gonna try to get mine a little squared up there. I'm gonna go ahead and try to kind of on this door width establish a perspective line. So, you know, a lot of times we'll draw a perspective line on a front corner. That's essentially what I'm doing here, although I went ahead and drew my door width first just because I'm trying to establish scale on this page, and so that's kind of why I started it the way I did. But I'm going to go ahead and strike a line to one vanishing point. I'm going to strike the line to the other vanishing point, make that maybe a little steeper, and I'm driving it off the front corner of that door. And you know what? While I'm here, I might just go ahead and establish that rear thickness of that vanishing point too, just to make me feel like there's a thickness here. Sometimes it it gets easy to miss. I got more room on this desk. This is kind of nice. I don't have to be right in my lap drawing this. All right, so this is, again, kind of what I'm going for, and if that's my thickness, the bulk of this drawing is going to be over here, right? Because I'm drawing this form over here on the right-hand side of this door. So, the first step is to kind of figure out, well, how far off the door is this? I really haven't established, other than the width of the door, I haven't established that many proportions yet, but if this is the width, it looks like it's about 2 widths off the center. If I'm just looking at what that is and what this is, it looks like it's about 2 widths, which I'm just going to estimate. I got some fuzz on this pen. Hold on, let me get the crud off the tip. This is probably not the type that Jared would use, but so I'm going to come in, one width would be right about there, and a second width would be right about there. So center line's going to be right about somewhere in there. And all of my ellipses are going to be driven out of that. So before I do an ellipse, what do? I'm going to establish the perspective going the opposite direction here, make sure it's converging. That becomes my axis. Boy, I'm going to be driving everything, a lot of things I should say, off of that axis right there. That's going to be a really good reference. And to establish that first ellipse for the flange, let's do a vertical. Got to see where that chord is going to fall. Got to have a vertical there to be able to get there first. Now, if I was in the mode of using Prismacolors right now, I would just start ghosting in. But I'm not doing that on this drawing. In this case, I'm going to need to use my templates. And I also need to kind of establish scale on this to see if I can move this up here. Can y'all see? Yeah, y'all can see that. Try to move this down a little bit and that up. So relative to kind of the width of what I just did, kind of looking at this almost looks like 2 door widths too. The flange actually looks pretty close to 2 door widths, which means it's going to finish, that flange is going to finish about halfway, right in there maybe, and it's going to be fairly large. I mean, this is going to be a flange that's going to show up probably somewhere in there. That gives me a little bit of a sense of scale for my ellipse. I hope I got an ellipse template big enough. I may not. Let's see what I got. And I'm going to start laying ellipse templates over. I started here with a 40 on mine. It may be different on yours. If your perspective is a little different, don't copy my degree. Just make it work right according to your chords. This looks pretty close, at least from the moment. I'm lining this up along my minor axis here. I've got it centered to my center point. It's pretty close to the height that I was suggesting. This was just pure luck, folks. I just picked one up. Usually it takes about 3 templates to get this right. It's pure luck. But a 40 degrees looking pretty good, and I'm looking at that chord up there that just happened to be drawn already because of that thickness, and that looks pretty even. What do y'all think? Is that a winner? I'm thinking I'm pretty close. I'm going to go ahead and drop that in. And again, I'm working in the ballpoint pen. So the beauty of the ballpoint pen is it's like your 5 to 10% weight of your Prismacolor. Real lightweight. I can come back and darken all this later and make it look a whole lot better. So there's ellipse number 1, where the flange meets the wood. The flange has a thickness. It's a very thin piece here, but you can see it does have a thickness. Because that thickness is so minor, I can really use the same ellipse again. I don't necessarily have to find a smaller ellipse. Now, if that thickness was way out here, I'd have to be changing degree and I'd have to be changing the scale. But because we're so close, I'm going to use the same ellipse template again. It's not going to make a huge difference. So I'm kind of eyeballing that thickness. I can see it's, steps out. It looks like maybe 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little more than 1/8, maybe between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. Make sure you hold to the same thickness is here, or the same angle here, I should say. And there's me another one. Everybody follow where I am? I'm still drawing this right here. This piece that's actually on the door itself. Can y'all see that little drawing up there? Try to get it where you can. This thickness. I might have drawn it a bit thick, but I'll pronounce it a little bit. Now, when I did that, here's an important point. I just changed the plane that I'm drawing on. Every time I do an offset this direction, this center line is now no longer my center line. For the next ellipse I draw, I have to offset forward that thickness, right? And this, don't get stuck on this. Y'all should have gone through this 8 times over, 10 times over on that exploded toy, or you know, the other explodeds that we do. But this idea that these ellipses moving this direction, I now have to calculate and remember that offset thickness. I'm gonna eyeball it because I can. I can just say, hey, it's about that thickness, and say it's right there. But don't forget that. Don't do this next intersection. This next intersection is right here where the post of the doorknob meets that flange. That comes forward. So I'm gonna stay in my 40 here for the moment. I'm gonna draw another vertical line here. That gives me something to look at relative to chords. And so again, you always want to draw that new vertical center line, get that lined up. I'm gonna need to reevaluate my thickness of my ellipse. And I'm just kind of coming down and establishing that it's probably gonna be relative thickness is probably somewhere in here. And I'm just looking at the thickness here relative to the whole flange. You can see most of the flange stays there. So I put two little tick marks, and that's gonna help me kind of estimate the size ellipse I want. So I'm using freehand estimation, and then I'm coming over here and just using templates to kind of hit the one I want. Now I'm gonna stay with the 40 for just a moment, because again, it's still part of this same, it's so thin, the difference here in perspective is so minor, it probably isn't gonna change. Technically it would be, but probably not 5 degrees change, which is what my increment is. So I'm gonna come in here and lay in the shaft thickness, which is right in here. Still sticking with 40 for me, but even if it's 35 for you or 30 or whatever it is, just stay with the same one. You're probably at this angle and that thickness, not moving around too much. Okay, now at this point I've got a little bit of a depth change, so I'm actually gonna once again estimate how thick that shaft is between the flange and the back of the handle. It's not terribly thick, but it looks like it's at least twice the flange thickness. So I'm gonna just again eyeball that, bring that forward to probably right in here, and say that my shaft thickness is gonna be from that center line to right here. And I'm gonna draw myself a new center line. So keep drawing these vertical lines. Don't quit on that, because that ends up being the point that really you're sighting to with your next ellipse. Now, technically, this ellipse should be a little bit larger, right? And if I use this, I guess this was called it a 3/16 ellipse on the previous one. Logic would say that I should probably move to the 7/8. Let me just look and see though. When I lay that 7/8 over this next spot, is that going to be a little bit too large? It might be just a hair, but you know what? I've already used 3 at that particular size, and I'm kind of feeling like it's time to grow it just a little bit. I'm still looking at my degrees, and they still look like they're lining up. I'm not feeling. See, I'm using that chord. I didn't actually draw that chord there. That chord is still these lines back here on the back line that were already there, but I'm already using that chord to sight, and I'm saying, well, my degree still is pretty close. I mean, the full travel that I've gone might be 3/4 of an inch in real space, right? So we're not talking about a lot of depth. So The perspective hasn't kicked in, but I am going to step up. Let's just see if I can step up one degree size. I feel like that's a bit extreme, but just given that I want to start creating some drama here, I'm going to go on and open that next ellipse up one scale size. And when I get into my 3-line thicknesses and start to add some of that in, I can fudge some of this rearward where that's not as extreme, but at this point I think this is going to help. Everybody with me so far? So I just keep estimating out a thickness and adding another depth to it. Now the next step is to create the back side of the handle, and it's the next largest ellipse since my flange. So and it's going to use again the same degree. I can't still move in degrees just yet, but how big is it going to be? Yeah, it looks like it almost looks like it lands about halfway. If I'm sighting across to the flange, it's like the distance between the flange and the shaft. It's almost like halfway right in there. There's a lot of ways I could sight that, but I'm going to sight it right here and just say, well, it really probably finishes maybe right there. And if I was to extend that center line on down, which I need to do anyway, probably finishes, if that's the center point, it's probably going to finish somewhere down in here. So that gives me a little bit of a sighting to go by to jump up to this next ellipse size. Now this is going to be a little bit larger one, and I'm just trying to fit it according to what I kind of estimated the height to be. And it looks like this one right in here, maybe this one. I think I'm going to go with this 1.5. I actually feel like I might have estimated a little thick, so probably. Does that look and feel about right? Yeah, I think I'm about right in there. So I'm going to go make sure that's on my minor axis. Make sure it stays centered up with this point and not that one. I'm going to put my next line, my next ellipse there. That becomes the back side. I haven't put these radiuses on. They really won't show up in the view I'm in. So I'm going to just keep it where I can see that as an ellipse. All good so far? So far this feels about right to me. Mine looks like it's, unless I'm looking at it wrong, it looks like it's working. Okay, now I get the big jump. I get to come from here to here. Big thickness. On a thickness of that depth, there's a number of things that's going to be happening. Obviously, the ellipse is going to get bigger because it's tapering. It physically is bigger. It's going to be getting larger still because it's in perspective and it is moving towards me a little bit more. It's also going to be getting a little bit thinner in degree. This will probably be the first ellipse I draw that does have a little bit thinner degree than the previous one. So if I'm at a 40, my first thought is I'm going to step to a 35 on this next one and just kind of see where that falls. But I also need to estimate, first of all, depth. Where's my new center line? How far out does that come? And if I'm looking at this thickness here, it's almost like everything I've drawn from that back edge to this beginning point is almost halfway. It's like it's driving, I could almost say from right here to right here is half, and then this new thickness will be that much more. You'll follow what I'm saying? I could look for like 3 different relationships, but the one that just kind of sticks out at me is right here. And it looks like that distance is about half. It might be just a little less than half actually, but it's close. So what I'm doing is I'm just translating that distance here. I'm saying there's that to center line is right here. So this represents that. So I just need to come out about that much further. So probably right in here. Wow, that's going to be way out there. But as I'm looking at center, let me double check, make sure, does that line up? This seems to make sense. I think that new center line is going to be pretty close to that. It might be just a little less than that, but it's way out here. And I'm going to go ahead and draw myself a new vertical axis there, new vertical line that's going to help me determine that ellipse. And you know what? I may be running out of ellipse scale here. I bet I'm, yep, I did. Okay, Shay's in trouble now. I'm going to have to freehand this outside one. I don't have an ellipse big enough. That's okay. We've done a lot of freehand. Let's do a good freehand. This is getting me started. First of all, before I get to that, you just want to make sure you plug everything in you can. So I'm going to go ahead and put another perspective line on here that's cutting through that center line. I know that's the right center line. I just started my drawing a little too big, but I like what I've started. I think this is working really nicely, actually. So I'm going to stick with it, and we're just going to have to step out on a limb here and do a little bit of freehand work. That's all right. So I'm going to go ahead and strike me another perspective line right there. That helps kind of sight me a little bit. I also know I'm going to need a chord line, and that this is now pushed out beyond where those two lines are. So I'm going to go ahead, and while I'm doing those perspective lines, do another line through here that is a chord line, and that shoots off to that vanishing point too. I'll use that in a minute. I could have put that in later, but I'll use that in a minute. And instead, what I think I'm going to try to do is figure out, can I create kind of a boundary for this to help me with that freehand? So if I know I'm going to have to come in here and do this by hand, the nice thing is I've got these beautiful, I think accurate ones started with the tools, such that when I get out here, I've got something really good to look at. I think I'll kind of be able to have a good reference. It won't be a muddy reference like it is with Prismacolor. So here's my point. There's my chord. I know that this height, let's look at how high this is, how thick this doorknob is. I can look at it and see that it doesn't quite come up to the height of that flange. Can y'all see that? The height of this doorknob, if I'm sketching across there, looks like it comes up just a hair shy of the flange. What does that tell me? It tells me that if I can translate the width of this flange across to this line, which I already have one of these lines already done there, I can actually estimate just a little bit inboard of that and should be fairly accurate, right? So let me do that with the top line of that flange. I'm just going to extend that flange tangency outward, forward I should say, to that line. And I'll go on and make this one a little bit better too. Actually, I'm not sure that really was originally part of the flange line, but I'll draw another one. I'm essentially bringing these lines forward, top and bottom here, to give me a sense of, actually, nope, hold on, did that wrong. Did it wrong. Went to the tangency of the flange. That's one way to look at it. That's not going to hurt me. But I want to get center line of the flange too. I want center line of the flange. Center line of the flange is right here. And that's going to help me too. That's actually where it strikes right here. So I know there'll be a point right there on the center line of the flange. And if I drop through on the bottom, and once again, I'm using perspective vanishing lines here to translate forward. Now I know my ellipse that I draw is going to be a little bit less than these two. How much less? Well, not a lot, but I'm just going to estimate. I'm going to say right there and right there. I'm going to do these with tick marks instead of points so they kind of show up. All I'm doing is trying to estimate so that when I get to my freehand here, I got something to look at and I'm not like out in left field, you know? And I'm using my geometry to get me there. So here's one, here's one. I know my top and bottom of my ellipse for this doorknob is going to be right in there. Left and right. Do I know what left and right's going to be? How would I figure that out? I've got a chord line. left and right's harder here, folks, because I can't really use an ellipse template. I don't have one quite big enough. Oh, I do have one big enough. Look at that. I sure do. I do have one big enough. I don't have to freehand it. It's scaled down just enough to make that happen. That's good news. So maybe it'll work for you too. But you know what? If it doesn't work, it's okay to freehand it. We'll clean it up when we get towards the end. So what I'm going to do, I stepped into 35 here. Let me just see. 35 may not be enough. Let's just start to look at that chord. What do you see? What do you think? Let me make sure I'm going to my vanishing point here. What do you think about that division right there? Does that look equal? What do you think?
For the most part, and I think if you go down, up or down 5 degrees, it's going to be too much.
Let's just look. I'm curious about a 30. I just want to look at a 30. I think you're right. I have a feeling this is the one, but just to ensure, for drama's sake, I could say, oh, it'd be nice if it got a little thinner. But let me just look and see what a 30 looks like. And I'm going to line it up kind of with that height. And I'll make sure I'm on the... Well, that looks pretty good too. In fact, I think this one might look just a little better. And because I want to establish a little more perspective drama, I'm going to go with the one that's a little thinner. If they both look pretty good, and I think they do, unless I'm missing something there, that one looks pretty good. I'm going to go with the 30 here. So I'm good to go. Except my template moved on me. So it's going to look like a freehand ellipse anyway. Y'all okay? I know I'm not going too fast. I'm more worried, is your drawing looking good? Okay. Now that I've drawn this, one of the things that I really couldn't see until I got to this point, honestly, it's just, you got to put tick marks, you got to estimate, but I'm actually questioning how far out I came with it a little bit, because I'm looking at the distance between, I know I'm about to draw this tangency from here to here and from here to here, and then I'm looking at the proportions of this. To me, this one looks a little thinner than what I've drawn here. I mean, not that it'll look bad, it's not that the design looks, in fact, I maybe argue this one would look better, but I am kind of questioning the proportion a little bit. It's like, and honestly, again, I don't think I could have seen it without drawing that ellipse first. I just couldn't get there. So it's possible you draw that ellipse, you say, I came out too far, I better back that up. And so, if you want to do that, do it. You're still in construction line. Pull that back, a little bit and redraw it. I'm sitting here trying to decide if I want to redraw it, partly because of cleanliness, but also because I actually don't think it looks bad a little bit deeper like that. And I really liked that 30-degree ellipse, and I'm not sure I could stick with the 30-degree if I pushed back just a little bit, because that's going to shift the angle. So I'm going to hold with it. Yeah.
So if ours is also like a little long like yours, is that okay?
Yeah, if it's a little deep like that, it's okay.
Thank you.
So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and connect those tangencies. That's an easy win. That's fun to do, right? We've been waiting to get there. I'm going to connect those tangencies. Now, at this point, I've got like 90% of the doorknob. I've got several concentrics that I could put. This is a little bit up to you, but I can see there's an offset, very thin offset right here. Let me get up a little bigger on this. Y'all take a look at this while I got it zoomed up a little bit. Right here, I'm coloring this in. There's actually a little step out offset that comes forward just a little bit, and it shows up over here a little bit. that's really just a detail because the actual lock insert is a separate part oftentimes from the doorknob itself. So I am going to go ahead and put that in while I'm in my 30 degree or whatever degree you're in. You may not be in 30 degree, but whatever degree your ellipse you're in, you can go ahead and let me pull back out here. Go ahead and put those offsets in just because it's going to add that little bit of detail. Remember to use the same center line. Remember to go to the same minor axis. And also remember to keep it light. Don't darken these yet. But I'm going to put one of those in. I'm going to offset that forward just a little bit to give myself some thickness. That's a nice detail, and it's typical of what you would see. By the way, one other note, you might have noticed there are also radiuses on this. There's a fairly substantial radius on the back part of that tapered shape and on the front part. Shay, you have not drawn a radius yet. No, I have not. I'm going to cheat those radiuses later when I come back in with my 3 line weights. It's right now, I actually want to kind of keep hard geometry and have good tangencies and center lines and things I'm driving from. It helps me build this better. Radiuses can muddy that up. So I'm going to kind of cheat those radiuses when I come back with my thicker lines later and just kind of round things off rather than trying to construct offsets and all of that stuff in this case. But I am going to put that little detail in that gives me an offset here. If I'm doing that offset here, it means that again, that plane and that center line moves forward just a little bit. Don't forget that. So I'm going to readjust that center line. I'm going to draw that center line. Make sure that gets drawn on that front face. And this now becomes the plane in which my my key will be drawn. In fact, there's one other thing here. I'll go ahead and put one more 30 degree. There's a circle that kind of represents the I guess the inner portion of the lock. And again, I'm just going to estimate that based really on how big it looks in diameter to the rest of the doorknob right here. So I'm going to stick with my 30. I'm going to come in here a little bit smaller, maybe somewhere in that neighborhood, making sure now that I've come to my offset thickness of where that new center line is, making also sure that I stay on that minor axis, and then I'm going to draw that one in. Starting to look pretty good. So now I'm going to draw my key. Now I'll come back to the door latch over here, but the key tends to be something that people get tripped up on. The key is gonna the thickness of the key. So the key starts out being. Let me draw this a little bit bigger. You've got a flat portion that's going into the lock, and then you've got a circle. This is a true circle, folks. And since that circle is actually in perspective and it is perpendicular to every other circle that I've drawn to this point, where is its minor axis gonna go? The right vanishing point. Exactly. And you know what? There's a hole in the key for the key ring that's right in here. Where is that minor axis for that hole gonna go? The same place. Boy, you'd be shocked how many people don't get this. I don't know what it is about a key because it's thin, I don't know, but so make sure it does that. Follow what you just said. And I'm gonna draw that thickness of the key right here. Again, I'm gonna kind of estimate it. I'm going to bring that forward as 2 lines in vanishing from the left to the left. This is the straight part of the key. I'm going to give that a thickness because the key does have a thickness. I can go ahead and draw the thickness in at least to get that started where I can kind of see it. So the key's entry is something like this. Now I have to, you just have to ignore all of these ellipses right here. Just look through them. Just pretend they're not there, and pretend like you're drawing for the first time an ellipse going to, with the minor axis going to this vanishing point out on this stem. I have to kind of estimate its height a little bit. I can see that its height is probably just a little bit greater than that offset that I created here. So I'm going to create a kind of a top and bottom box for it, again, just to give me a reference. Didn't draw that very well. Try again. I'm eyeballing these, but it helps me to give me a line to shoot for. Ellipses can be tough to sight sometimes. So I know there's a top and bottom boundary box for that I've just created. How far out does that circle have to come? Center point. I don't really want too much material here that's straight, so I can see that I've already drawn way more than it needs to be. So center point is, you know what, I'm not going to draw a center point. I'm actually going to try to play with ellipses first and see what degree needs to kind of happen here. And I'm just going to aim them a little bit. So I can still see my vanishing lines, and I can still kind of see, here was the 35 that I was playing with a moment ago. I'm just going to get something kind of here in the middle, and I can see, I do kind of need a center line, don't I? I think, to be clear, I probably do. So let's go on and draw a center line for that ellipse. And it's going to be right there. It's going to step off a thickness and probably off that much more. I'm just going to estimate it as being somewhere out here. I'll give myself a starting point, and if I don't like it, I'll come back and fix it. So I've got a height for my key, I've got a center line for my key, and I'm going to go ahead and start aiming these for that right hand axis. And I can see that using my 35 that my chords are not working. That in fact the 35 is too thin, right? So I'm going to open back up to a 40. May need to go higher still. Let's see. 40 degree. Let's go on and draw the center line through this axis so I know I'm going to the right point and everything's real clear. Let's try the 40 again and see where we are. I would say 40 is still not quite right. It still feels like this right hand side is too large. So I'm going to go 45. Just keep working up the ladder here until I get one that I think is close. Now this one's getting a lot closer. Let's see if make sure everything's lined up. 45 for me on this one is a lot closer. Let me get a 50 and just double check a 50, because it could be 50 might work also. It feels a little thin there. Let me open this up to a 50. Oh, I'm liking 50 on this one. I think 50 is a little bit closer to being even. Make sure I'm there. Yep, I think I'm going to go with 50. Make sure I've got the right distance. I might actually pull this back a little bit. I feel like I may have stepped out just a little too far. I probably did. So I'm going to pull this back. So I'm correcting before I even get going, but I got to make sure that I still go to that vanishing point. You know, since I'm going to correct, I might as well correct my center line first. Let's just pull back. Draw a new center line and do it right. And the other thing is I'm kind of looking at that straight part of the key shaft and making sure that it looks like I'm kind of even there too. I mean, technically, if you get it centered, it should be right, but I just want to make really doubly sure that it's right. Now I can also add that key thickness right here too, and I'm going to eyeball that. But it's kind of based on the thickness I had already given that key right here. And I might as well go ahead and put my keyhole in there too. And actually my smallest ellipse is a bit large, but I tell you what, I'm going to use it anyway, and I'm going to try to make sure my pen just stays absolutely vertical so that I keep it more or less keep the offset as much as I can within that template. Might have hit that one a little low. Bless you. Come in here and hit that thickness. All right. Everybody there? You know what, this was actually a mistake line back here when I drew that second ellipse, but I actually like the fact that it's there. It actually almost looks like a radius contour line now that I'm looking at it. All of this I can come in and really work on in terms of darkening up in a minute, but before I do that, I think I'm done, aren't I, with the doorknob and key? I want to go ahead and come back to my latch out here before I darken everything up. So, the latch, how do I get there? Well, remember, the latch is on center with the shaft and all of these other things that we're drawing here. And the way that you get there is you wrap it from center line down this door face to center line back. And I've already got that line drawn here because I did it right when I first started constructing this. I'm going to come off of that where that flange touches the door. It hits right here. It turns the corner. So I know for a fact that my latch is going to be centered right there. You can see it doesn't take up the full width of the door. There's meat of the wood on either side of that where you can actually, it's not going to get torn out if you... I had a fire, by the way. I had a fire in my house in April. Leftover ember in the fireplace from the night before, reignited 14 hours later. My wife had been in the house all morning, nothing had happened. Reignited 14 hours later, smoked our house completely, didn't burn anything up, thankfully. But the firemen came, the neighbors saw it. I was getting texted in the middle of class, and my phone I'd left it up in my office. Didn't even know if my house had burned down or not. Firemen came, they had to bust my door in because it was all locked up, of course, which I was thrilled that they did that. They completely slaughtered my door. It was dead bolted, and so it had two of these pins in the door frame. And you know, they do this is what they do for a living. They had no problem getting through that door, but they just completely annihilated that door. And that pin, the latch, completely bent before the door frame did it. I thought for sure it would have completely broken the door frame out, but in fact the lock itself bent and gave way just enough to let them in. But I was blown away by how strong wood is. I mean, you think of metal, and metal is stronger than wood, but you think in certain cases of physics, you would think the metal would push right through that wood, and in some cases it doesn't. So it doesn't take much wood to hold up sometimes, but in this case, you've got some thickness of wood on either side of this, and we've got to represent that. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to estimate that. I know that if I draw this vertically, let's go ahead and estimate thickness a little bit here first. I'm just going to say, hey, there's a thickness of that right there. I might have gone a little on the thin side, if anything. I'm going to come back here. Which one of these was my right line? I think the left one was more accurate. So I'm going to come back here and do an offset to the rear. I could do a diagonal here and probably get this a lot more accurate, but At some point you got to start estimating a little bit. So I've given myself kind of the boundaries of the latch. Now I just got to figure out the height. And if I look at the height of this latch, I can see, look at this, I actually have an alignment. I didn't even know it was there. I have the height of the door handle thickness. This thickness right here looks like it's about the same thickness as that. It's almost like you could carry that line over. So why not carry it over? It's easy to do, right? All I need to do is come to the center line of this thickness, translate it back to this surface, which lands right there, and then wrap it around the end of that thickness of the door. And that should give me the height pretty close to where that latch is. And I can do the same thing on the bottom. Tangency, or the center line right here, actually that line's already drawn for me. Excellent. All I got to do is carry that back, wrap it around. Make sure you stick with your convergence on your perspective when you do this, and wrap the corner. And I got my top and bottom boundaries now of my latch. And I drove that just off the proportions of my door handle, because I'm just looking for visual relationships. So much of design is about just looking for and establishing and creating visual relationships between things. So there you go. I now have the boundaries of my latch. Once I have that, I have, it looks like a screw hole and a screw hole, and then the actual latch itself in the middle. In order to get that centered, I am going to use a diagonal on this. I think at this point that gets a little easier, and I've kind of got it established. I do need a center line through that, so that diagonal is going to give me that. My two ellipses for those two screw holes will be right there, and I'll have a box that's bounded. I can essentially look at the thickness of that box this way as the shaft. Look at this. The shaft of that door handle actually almost lines up with the thickness of that right there, right? So once again, I can wrap that thickness. And let's do it. I've got the height of that shaft. Let's wrap it to the left. And then wrap it back around to establish that the latch. Did I do that right? I missed that. Drew it up a little bit. I'll draw it up a little more. There we go. And then right here. And once I have those, where those cross the diagonals gives me the width. I don't actually have to, is that right? No, that's not actually accurate. It could be out further than that. Yeah, that doesn't necessarily correspond to the diagonals, although I can reference those a little bit. Looks like this latch comes out a lot closer to the edge of the plate there, so I'm gonna pull that out. Now once I establish this one, I could use my mirroring method. Perhaps I should, since I'm already in kind of construction mode here. Maybe not. I'm just gonna go with it. Put some meat on the other side. Feels like my latch is a little thick. Not sure why, just feels a little thick. It has a depth that comes out this direction. So yeah, a few weeks ago I had to repair my door. I had a new door made. It was a custom door I'd had made several years before, and I had to come in and have that door remade. and they remade it they made it out of a much better material than the first one. I didn't ask them to, but it's like twice as heavy as the first door was. I don't know why. And me bets that the door is not going to break at all next time. They're going to totally tear out the door frame if they have to break it down again. And it is very expensive. If you've not had ServPro come out and clean your duct work in your house before, this is a very, very expensive venture. This is why you definitely want renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance when you get a house. It helps pay for disasters like that. In fact, I think you're required to if you have a loan on your house, which I do, so the bank pretty much wants you to do that. That feels a little thick. I don't know why. I'm trying to figure out if, I guess perhaps just the thickness of my door was too great, so I was kind of driving off of that a little bit. It's aligned properly and all, but it just feels proportionally like that latch might have been a bit thick. I may correct that a little bit, fudge it a little bit when I get into my darker lines, which I'm just about to do. The last thing I got to do here is put in these two ellipses that represent the screws. You don't have to do a Phillips head screw if you don't want to. I'm just going to do an ellipse, and I'm going to establish a center line. I'm eyeballing that. I'm just going to say, hey, the center line's about right in there. I'm going to strike. This is like the key now. This is going to the right vanishing point. I'm going to put my line through there, and yeah, I'm going to strike even a chord through here and make sure I'm on the right track. Let's just start out with a 50. 50 is what it was over here, so actually over here it's diminishing from that point. It should be a little bit thinner than a 50, so it should be moving back. I'm going to jump back to say a 40. Start with that one first and see how far off it is, and I'm going to step down to probably my smallest ellipse here, and if I lay the 40 right across there, boy, that's pretty close. It gets to a point where you start being able to kind of almost estimate it. I'm going to make that just a little bigger, but that's pretty close. And at this point, I'm just gonna, I can hit that and eyeball it because I got another line right there to go to, so I'm gonna roll that one in. And since I'm here, since I have my template right here, my 40 that I'm working on, I am now going to start darkening a few lines. And I'm going to start with the ones I just completed, just to kind of build it out just a little more. Come back and fix those two since I was there. I'm going to add a little bit. I'm going to actually put my radiuses a little bit on this latch. You notice how I do this first? I put my radiuses on first, and then I connect the dots with them with my straight edge, so I can come back in here and hit that a little harder. This one will end up being flare because it's an occluding contour, right? It's one of these outside contours, so I'm going to hit this one a little harder. This is a spider line. And in some cases, I might just hand do it. In that case, here's a technical line that I'm actually doing freehand here, just because I can, and it's easier to kind of wrap that around and do that. That all gets hit a little harder with the flare. I come back with the fine liner and attack this just a little bit. Maybe even with a double line, maybe even wrap that a little bit. It's nice to knock the corners off. Now, because this is such a heavy line out here at the edge of the door, I'm going to hit this one pretty hard too with a flare. It's kind of nice to blend them off like that too. The flare is really good at this. If you kind of start the line here and strike up and then lift up at the end, it kind of tapers your line. It kind of makes it look like it's going off for everness, and you don't have to The flare gives you that kind of paintbrush feel a little bit, which can be kind of nice. I'm going to come in here real quickly. I'm going to actually freehand these in, and I'm going to put a little bit of a radius here that mimics what Jared's going to do on the next sketch. He's gonna come in and really construct that radius, but I'm gonna just kind of put this in freehand. And then maybe that was a mistake. Maybe I should have done that one in with a technical pen. I'm gonna hit these a little bit lighter. I'm gonna put these little radiuses on there. I think that really does help to just establish these really mild radiuses. Now you're not looking at me anymore, right? At this point, you're totally making your drawing look better. I just know you are. At this point, it ought to all be about your drawing. And if you do it well, you're gonna do it better than I did here, because I made my latch too thick somehow. Now I can't even remember which ellipse templates I was using earlier. That's what makes it hard to come back. You're like, well, I guess it was a 35 that I was hitting those early ones with.
40 and 35 and 7.
That's 40. Okay, 40 is what I started with. Yep, 40s. So I'm going to come in here and I will hit a few of these lines darker now.
Now, Shay, the
Yeah.
doorknob touching the door, wouldn't that be like a third line width?
If you're not touching the door, say,
The part that's touching the door. Would that be thicker?
you know, you could make this one a little. You're saying this rear ellipse here? Yeah. You could make that one a little thicker. Sure, you could. Technically, it's not a spider line because it does have a surface there, but because it's kind of a major material change, it's a good idea. That one could be a little bit thicker. It's a good thought. And I'm going to come in here and just keep darkening these a little bit. Remember, leave your old one. Again, the constructions help this. It actually makes it look better to leave those pin lines there. I'm going to hit this one a little darker because it does have air behind it. So I'll jump back to the flare here. I'm going to go ahead and first actually I'm going to connect the dots on the tangent seek because I want to get this ellipse right. So it is kind of important to get this ellipse right here. So I'm going to get that laid in first. And in this case, because I have a line that starts out thick, I'm going to divide this line. I'm going to start this with a flare and end it with a fine liner. So using 2 pins on one line, hit this really hard, making sure I don't hit my key there. And then I'll come in with my fine liner and connect the dots. Or I'll hit the rest of that ellipse in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and connect here. Remember, there's no points. This completely blends, and if it looks like it needs to blend more, come in and color it in a little bit to ensure that it blends. No footballs. And yeah, let me come back in and hit the rest of that large ellipse with my fine liner now that I've kind of got it established on the outside. And I'm going to go ahead and put on kind of that second line there just really lightly because I actually think that kind of looks good. And then darkening these lines. You know what? I may come on and do my key first because my key is going to be fairly dark and I want to make sure that shows up. So let's do the key first. And I think I used a 50 on the key, didn't I? I think I did. And this is kind of the same thing. I'm going to finish that line with a fine liner. The offset will be completely done in fine liner. Now I'll come back, now that the key is drawn, it gives me, I know that those heavier lines are kind of in, and I can come back and I can sight a little bit better to what's going on here. I'm pretty close. What lines did I miss? Boy, this is totally a hybrid. Is it even an FRE? It's kind of is, it kind of is not. It's definitely in between an FRE. I should call it a TRE probably, because it's technical kind of and somewhat of FRE, but we're going to call it FRE 19. FRE 19. And we'll go with that. I almost feel like it is a little bit of Sharpie time here. It's like I just need that third weight. Sharpie's so brute force though, but why not have some brute force here? Really just, I want something between my flare and Sharpie, and I'm just gonna double up on flare because Sharpie just hits it so hard. Keep your fingers out of your ink here. It's easy to Easy to get a smudge, especially when you start laying the thicker lines down. I messed that all up. Let's go on and put that in a little darker. You know, there's so many things that dictate what pens to use and when to do things, like what size paper to use. I'm sitting here thinking, why do I not want to use a Sharpie on this? Well, part of it's the scale of the drawing. I want to use a Sharpie, but it's just a little, at least the one I have is kind of worn down. I'm like, it's going to put too heavy of a line there. So I'm going to double and triple up on some flare lines and try to do it just with the flare and kind of paint the flare in. But you know, a lot of it is also the fact that this is a doorknob. That it's not an ice cooler, it's not a chair. It's a small thing to begin with. And thick lines used to describe small things are somewhat of a problem for me. So I'm feeling like I don't want to use a marker or a Sharpie just because I'm afraid the lines are just too overbearing for drawing a doorknob. So for me, that's kind of my rationale. And a lot of these things you end up kind of questioning whether you should or not, and that's, for me, that's kind of one of those things. Might do a double line in here just to show that there's a little thickness there. All right, FRE 19, Doorknob and Key.